Rick Ross just released a 15-year cry for help and disguised the whole thing as a rap album. Set in Stone is supposed to be Rick Ross flexing on the entire industry, proving Rick Ross is still the biggest boss in the room. Instead, Set in Stone is the most embarrassing forensic evidence file in hip-hop history. A collection of tracks where every single bar accidentally confesses that 50 Cent broke something inside Rick Ross back in 2009, and Rick Ross never, ever recovered. By the end of this breakdown, you're going to hear something that nobody else on the entire internet has connected yet. And when you hear it, the entire album collapses into what Set in Stone actually is, a confession carved in stone. Before we connect every single dot, understand the framework here. This is not a track-by-track review. This is a psychological autopsy. We are treating Set in Stone the way a forensic analyst treats a crime scene. Every lyric is evidence. Every feature is a witness statement. Every subliminal is a fingerprint. And the fingerprints all point back to one man, Curtis Jackson, 50 Cent. The man who does not even need to respond anymore because Rick Ross is doing the work for 50 Cent, building 50 Cent a monument out of Rick Ross's own insecurity, brick by painful brick. Let us rewind to ground zero. January 2009. Rick Ross is riding high, chest puffed out, catalog growing, and Rick Ross makes the single most catastrophic career decision in modern hip-hop history. Rick Ross leaks a song called Mafia Music and decides, out of every human being on planet Earth, to take an unprovoked shot at 50 Cent Curtis Jackson, the most ruthless, most surgical, most cold-blooded beef assassin the culture has ever witnessed. Think about what Rick Ross was looking at in 2009. 50 Cent had already dismantled Ja Rule. 50 Cent had already turned Murder, Inc. into a ghost town. 50 Cent had already demonstrated that 50 Cent treats rap beef the way a surgeon treats a tumor. Find the target, cut the target out, make sure the target never grows back. And Rick Ross, fresh off a couple radio hits, still building a persona, looked at that body count and said, yes, let me poke that bear. That is not a calculated chess move. That is a rookie walking into a lion's den wearing a meat suit. And here's the part that should live in Rick Ross's nightmares every single night for the rest of Rick Ross's natural life. 50 Cent was laughing through the entire war. 50 Cent never broke a sweat. 50 Cent never raised Rick Ross's heart rate. 50 Cent turned the beef into cartoons, comedy skits, viral moments, pimpin' curly episodes, sex tape allegations, baby mama field trips, and a non-stop content factory that made Rick Ross the punchline of the entire internet. 50 Cent humiliated Rick Ross for sport while barely lifting a finger. That is a critical distinction that defines everything happening right now on Set in Stone. There is a difference between a man fighting for Rick Ross's life and a man playing with Rick Ross's food. 50 Cent was playing. Rick Ross was bleeding. And 15 years later, the bleeding has not stopped. Now fast forward to 2026. 15 years. A decade and a half. 15 years of 50 Cent building empires. G-Unit, Vitamin Water, Power, the entire television universe, Sire Spirits, film production, boxing promotions. 15 years of 50 Cent turning the Rick Ross beef into a footnote in a legendary career. And what is Rick Ross doing on Rick Ross's brand new album? Still taking shots on Mahogany Caskets, on 23, on Big Fish, track after track after track. Rick Ross is still swinging at a man who already left the building, changed clothes, grabbed dinner, and went to sleep. Let me tell you something, and you might want to write this down because this is a diagnostic key to the entire album. When a man is throwing punches 15 years after the fight ended, the man is not winning. The man never landed a single meaningful blow, and the loss still haunts the man every single day. That is not confidence. That is a wound that never closed. Now, we have to talk about the moment, the nuclear detonation. The moment Rick Ross has never lived down, will never live down, and apparently cannot stop trying to explain away even in 2026. This is a bomb 50 Cent dropped, and the fallout is still glowing radioactive 15 years later. Picture the scene. Rick Ross is on every track, rapping like a certified kingpin. Kilos moving through the port of Miami. Drug empire mythology. Untouchable boss energy. Rick Ross built Rick Ross's entire persona. Rick Ross's entire brand. Rick Ross's entire identity. On being this larger-than-life street legend who rose in the underworld. And then 50 Cent walks in with the receipts. 50 Cent and G-Unit pulled the actual paperwork, the real, physical, government file documents, and exposed Rick Ross as a corrections officer, a CO, a prison guard, the exact opposite of everything Rick Ross claimed to be. 50 Cent obtained the transcripts, waved the documents on camera for the whole world to see, and the entire Kingpin fantasy collapsed in real time, on record, in front of every fan on Earth. In hip-hop culture, in the streets, being exposed as a corrections officer while claiming to be a drug lord is a career death sentence. The one unforgivable sin. The one thing the culture does not let you come back from, because the culture's entire economy is built on authenticity. You cannot build a mythology on being the biggest drug kingpin in Miami, and then have paperwork proving you were the person checking inmates into their cells. 50 Cent did not whisper this information. 50 Cent broadcast the information. 50 Cent printed the information. 50 Cent made sure every blog, every radio station, every fan, every critic, every comedian on the planet knew that Rick Ross's entire identity was a costume. And here's the wildest part. On Rick Ross's 2026 album on the track Big Fish, Rick Ross is still trying to explain the corrections officer situation away. 15 years later. 15 years and Rick Ross is out here saying, I was just doing my job. It was a reason behind it. It is gold mines around people's faces. Brother, nobody is buying the explanation. The job was the problem. Rick Ross spent years pretending to be a cartel boss, while Rick Ross was literally guarding the people Rick Ross claimed to be. 50 Cent branded Rick Ross a fraud in 2009, and the ink never came off. Every time Rick Ross opens Rick Ross's mouth about credibility, about authenticity, about being a boss, that CO stamp is still burned into Rick Ross's forehead like a cattle brand, and set in stone proves the brand is still there, because Rick Ross cannot stop talking about it. Now this next piece is pure comedy. On the song 23, Rick Ross gets bold and raps, I effed your baby mom for 4 songs. Oh, big flex, right? Real gangster energy. Except, and this is the beautiful, hilarious, devastating part, the bar is completely backwards. See, in the real beef, in the actual documented history that the entire internet watched unfold, it was 50 Cent who allegedly pulled up on Rick Ross's baby mama. It was 50 Cent who allegedly put the whole encounter on camera and narrated the whole thing for the world to see. So when Rick Ross raps that bar in 2026, what Rick Ross is actually doing is trying to flip a historically humiliating L into a fabricated W, because the real story is too embarrassing for Rick Ross to say out loud. And the 4 songs part? Rick Ross is referring to Rick Ross's own diss tracks, Mafia music, and the rest of the catalog Rick Ross produced during the beef. So basically Rick Ross is bragging that Rick Ross made for entire songs in the beef Rick Ross still lost. That is like losing a boxing match and then bragging to the press about how many times Rick Ross swung and missed. This is not a punchline. This is a grown man rewriting Rick Ross's own defeat in real time and hoping nobody in the audience remembers what actually happened. We remember Rozay. The entire internet remembers. The receipts are still online. Here is another detail that tells you everything about the psychological state of the artist. On Mahogany Caskets, Rick Ross could not even step to 50 Cent alone. Rick Ross had to drag T.I. onto the track, another artist who has been beefing with 50 Cent and who recently dropped Rick Ross's own stream of disses aimed at 50 Cent. So, let us count the combatants. That is 2 established multi-platinum rappers teaming up against one man. And here's the tell of all tells. Even with 2 against 1, even with a tag team alliance, the shots still land soft. The bars still sound nervous. That is a diagnostic marker that reveals the entire emotional state. Nobody wants to smoke with 50 Cent one-on-one. These artists have to gang up, form a little coalition, hold hands across the booth, and even then, even with numerical superiority, the disses arrive limp. Meanwhile, 50 Cent has spent Rick Ross's entire career diving into beefs with whole crews, entire labels, full rosters, and 50 Cent comes out on top every single time with a grin on 50 Cent's face. The math tells the whole story. Strength in numbers is just weakness with extra steps. If you need a partner to feel brave enough to throw a subliminal, you have already lost the psychological war before the first bar drops. Now here's where the forensic analysis gets grim. Because Rick Ross does not have a single target Rick Ross can actually beat, Rick Ross starts spraying shots at everybody on this album. The pattern is unmistakable. A man swinging wildly in the dark, hoping to hit something, anything, that will make the man feel like a winner again. The album is a scattergun of pure insecurity, and every stray bullet reveals something deeper. First target, Drake. Rick Ross sends a barrage of soft subliminals at the Sixth God. On Maybach Music 7 and Camel Meat, Rick Ross is rapping about how these dudes don't want beef, they're not from the streets, and taking little jabs about ghostwriting. You still biting my rhymes. I could sue you for my likeness. Rick Ross even drops the champagne line. a clear nod to Drake's old Champagne Poppy alias, and references for all the dogs' callbacks. Now, why is Rick Ross so pressed about Drake specifically? Because Drake name-dropped Rick Ross first on the Iceman album, and Drake clearly got under Rick Ross's skin. And here's the funny part. Rick Ross went on TMZ before the album dropped and gave these wishy-washy, non-committal answers about whether Rick Ross would even diss Drake. Set in Stone is all about etching a little bit at a time. Etching a little bit at a time? That is not a killer's mentality. That is a man who is scared to fully commit to a war, because Rick Ross learned, from 50 Cent, the hard way, what happens when you start something you cannot finish. Rick Ross flinched. The flinch is on camera. And the flinch is the fingerprint of a man who still remembers the consequences. Second target, Jay-Z. Then out of absolutely nowhere, Rick Ross fires an Epstein list line on Ring Around the Rosie. All these dudes is on the Epstein list. Now, to most people's knowledge, only 2 rappers were named in connection to the Epstein files. Pusha T and Jay-Z. So this looks like a shot at HOV. And the context makes the subliminal even juicier. This allegedly ties back to Bad Blood after Rick Ross gave a suspiciously cold, standoffish, flat answer on the Joe Budden podcast about why Rick Ross skipped Jay-Z's anniversary concert. When the host asked Rick Ross did not say, "That's my brother, I could make it, blessings." Rick Ross gave this indifferent, almost dismissive non-answer that had the entire room raising eyebrows. So now combine the cold interview moment with the Epstein bar, and the picture looks like Rick Ross is beefing with Jay-Z. Rick Ross is opening fronts on every side of the map. Drake to the left, Jay-Z to the right. 50 Cent in Rick Ross's rearview mirror. That is not confidence. That is chaos. That is a man who has lost control of the battlefield and is just firing in every direction, hoping the noise sounds like victory. Third target, Gunplay. Rick Ross's own former best friend. It gets worse. Rick Ross even took a shot at Gunplay. Gunplay. Rick Ross's former Triple C's artist. Gunplay. One of Rick Ross's alleged closest former allies. This came after Gunplay did some interviews saying less than flattering things about Rick Ross, talking about how Rick Ross controls budgets, how Gunplay and Rick Ross do not talk anymore, all of that. Gunplay later tried to clean the situation up, saying, "Love him, my brother, doors always open." But Rick Ross still fired back with subliminal anyway. Think about what that reveals about the internal state. 50 Cent kept Gina tight through wars against the entire industry. 50 Cent's soldiers rode for 50 Cent until the wheels fell off. Rick Ross cannot even keep Rick Ross's own best friend loyal. Rick Ross is out here dissing the people who used to ride for Rick Ross, used to bleed for Rick Ross, used to defend Rick Ross in every interview. When your own camp is turning on you and your response is to fire subliminals at your own former soldiers, that is not a boss operating from power. That is a man whose empire is crumbling from the inside, and instead of fixing the foundation, the man is punching the walls. Fourth target, DJ Akademiks. And here is a genuinely hilarious one. Rick Ross drops a line. Run and ask Akademiks. He'll tell you who runs a business. Rozay, my guy, do you know who Akademiks is? Akademiks is aligned with Drake. If you actually ask Akademiks who runs a business, lyrically, financially, in music video budgets, in streaming numbers, in any metric you want to pull up, Akademiks' answer is going to be Drake over Rick Ross every single time, without hesitation, without a second thought. Rick Ross literally name-dropped a guy who would testify against Rick Ross in any court of public opinion. That is how scattered and confused this album is. Rick Ross is calling witnesses who would take the stand against Rick Ross. Rick Ross is citing sources who would undermine Rick Ross's own argument. The left hand does not know what the right hand is doing, and both hands are trembling. Fifth target, Queso's father. And finally, Rick Ross goes after Queso's father, calling Queso's father a rat and a snitch for informing on Queso's own son over a crime. Rick Ross takes this super hardline, tough guy, zero tolerance, no snitching under any circumstances stance. And on the surface, fine. Okay, the code is the code. But hold that thought. Hold that thought tight. Because this is where the entire album collapses on Rick Ross's own head. And this is a connect-the-dots moment that nobody else on the internet has put together in this exact way. Here is the checkmate. Here is a dot connection that turns Set in Stone from a mediocre rap album into a forensic exhibit of self-destruction. Rick Ross is calling Queso's father a rat for snitching. This is Rick Ross, the corrections officer, the literal, documented, paperwork-proven prison guard, the man whose entire credibility was destroyed because Rick Ross worked on the side of law enforcement. And now Rick Ross is lecturing the world about snitching? Rick Ross is positioning Rick Ross as the ultimate authority on the no-snitching code. Do you understand the magnitude of the irony? The man whose entire career got body bagged for working on the side of the law is now the snitch police, the moral arbiter, the judge who did and did not violate the code. You cannot make this up. This is the kind of irony that a scriptwriter would reject as too on the nose, except it is actually happening on a real album in real time. But it gets even better. And this is it that seals the entire diagnosis. On the same album, the same project, where Rick Ross is condemning snitching as the ultimate unforgivable sin, Rick Ross features Gucci Mane, and a whole lot of people in the streets, a whole lot of voices with real credibility, believe Gucci Mane snitched on Pooh after being held at gunpoint in a situation that made headlines. So let me get this straight. Rozay, snitching is the ultimate sin, the irredeemable violation, the thing that makes Queso's father a rat and a monster. Unless the snitch gets you streams, features, and sales, then suddenly the snitch is a collaborator, then suddenly the snitch gets a verse, then suddenly the snitch gets a feature credit and a rollout. Let me translate. Snitching is evil when other people do it, but when the snitch can boost your first week numbers, snitching is just business. That right there's the most Rick Ross thing that has ever Rick Rossed. That contradiction exposes Rick Ross completely, totally, and irreversibly. It shows that Rick Ross has no real code, no real principles, no real North Star, just whatever is convenient for the check, whatever is convenient for the chart position, whatever is convenient for the moment. And you know who called this exact energy back in 2009? 50 Cent. 50 Cent told the entire world that Rick Ross was a fraud, a fake, a man who would say and do anything for money and clout, a man whose entire identity was performance, a man with no real foundation underneath the mythology. And here we are, 15 years later, watching Rick Ross prove 50 Cent right on Rick Ross's own album. 50 Cent prediction from 2009 aged like fine wine. No, 50 Cent prediction aged like a diamond. 50 Cent diagnosed Rick Ross in 2009, wrote the prognosis, and Set in Stone is the confirmation that the doctor was right. Every track on Set in Stone is a symptom. Every subliminal is a data point. Every contradiction is a confirmation of 50 Cent's original diagnosis. This is a man who will contradict Rick Ross's own stated principles in the span of a single album track list because the principles were never real to begin with. So let us bring the autopsy to a close. Set in Stone is not a victory lap. Set in Stone is not a flex. Set in Stone is not a comeback. Set in Stone is a confession carved in stone. Rick Ross's own words. Rick Ross's own contradictions. Rick Ross's own wounds. Permanently etched into discography. 15 years after the beef started. 50 Cent did not even have to release a single diss track in response. 50 Cent did not have to lift a finger. 50 Cent did not have to tweet. 50 Cent did not have to post. 50 Cent did not have to do anything. And 50 Cent is still living inside Rick Ross's head. Rent-free, penthouse suite, keys to the whole building, concierge service, complimentary breakfast. Look at the scoreboard. 50 Cent moved on and built empires. G-Unit Records, Vitamin Water, the entire Power Television universe, Sire Spirits, film production, boxing promotions, book deals. 50 Cent turned the Rick Ross beef into a footnote in a legendary career and kept climbing. 50 Cent counts money. Rick Ross counts grudges. 50 Cent laughs. Rick Ross seeds. 50 Cent builds. Rick Ross swings at ghosts. 50 Cent moved forward. Rick Ross is stuck in 2009, frozen the moment the CO paperwork dropped, replaying the humiliation on a loop, trying to rewrite the outcome with every new album and failing every single time. And now the connect the dots diagnosis is complete. Every track on Set in Stone traces back to one origin point. Every stray bullet, Drake, Jay-Z, Gunplay, Akademiks, Queso's father, originates from the same wound. The corrections officer exposure, the baby mama humiliation, the cartoon treatment, the total, public, irreversible dismantling of a manufactured identity. 50 Cent did not just win a rap beef. 50 Cent performed a personality extraction. 50 Cent peeled back the costume and showed the world a corrections officer underneath, and Rick Ross has been trying to stitch the costume back together ever since. Set in Stone is the latest attempt, and like every attempt before, the stitching is visible. The seams are showing. The fabric is fraying. And underneath the declining fabric, the CO paperwork is still there, still glowing, still radioactive, still proving that 50 Cent was right about everything from the very first day. It was over in 2009. Set in stone, just carve the L into, well, stone. Permanently. Irrevocably. The album title is the one honest thing about the entire project. Because the loss is set in stone. The fraud is set in stone. The wound is set in stone. And the man who inflicted all three, Curtis Jackson, 50 Cent, does not even need to acknowledge the album exists because the album is doing all the work for 50 Cent. Rick Ross is building 50 Cent's legacy with every bitter bar. Rick Ross is writing 50 Cent's victory speech with every rewritten history lesson. Rick Ross is erecting 50 Cent's monument with every swinging, missing, desperate punch thrown 15 years too late. That is a full forensic breakdown. If you rock with 50 Cent, if you've been riding since Get Rich or Die Trying, let me know in the comments right now. Tell me your favorite moment from the entire beef, the Pimpin' Curly episodes, the Baby Mama saga, the CO paperwork drop, all of it. Drop your favorite moment below. Smash that like button if this breakdown connected dots you had not seen connected before. Subscribe for more, because I will be back with the next chapter the moment Rick Ross opens Rick Ross's mouth again. And Rick Ross will open Rick Ross's mouth again, because the wound never closed and the bleeding never stopped. I will catch you in the next one. Peace.